The morning mist clung to the bare branches of the oak trees surrounding little Angel's nursery, like ghostly fingers, reluctant to let go. The red brick building stood silent in the pre-dawn darkness, its cheerful yellow shutters and hand-painted welcome sign a stark contrast to the tragedy that had unfolded there 18 years ago. 18 years ago, 3-year-old Emma Charlotte Hayes vanished from her daycare in Millbrook, Vermont, during what should have been a routine Tuesday afternoon. One moment she was finger-painting at the art table, her blonde curls catching the afternoon sunlight streaming through the classroom windows. The next, she was gone, leaving behind only a purple butterfly hairclip and questions that would haunt her mother, Sarah Hayes, for nearly 2 decades. But 18 years later, Sarah Hayes was flipping through the latest issue of Vogue during her lunch break at the Millbrook Public Library, and what she saw on page 47 changed everything. Sarah's hands trembled as she stared at the fashion spread titled New England's Rising Stars. There, modeling a flowing cream-colored dress against the backdrop of a Boston brownstone, was a young woman with familiar features. The model's blonde hair cascaded over her shoulders in waves that Sarah had spent countless nights running her fingers through when Emma was small. But it wasn't just the hair that made Sarah's breath catch in her throat. It was the birthmark, a small crescent-shaped mark just below the model's left collarbone, barely visible above the dress's neckline. Sarah had kissed that mark 1,000 times when Emma was a baby, had watched it grow with her daughter's tiny body. The model's name was listed as Chloe Richardson, age 21, represented by Elite Modeling Boston. Sarah's coffee cup slipped from her nerveless fingers, crashing to the library's hardwood floor and splattering brown liquid across the biography section. The sound echoed through the quiet afternoon space, causing several patrons to look up from their books with mild disapproval. But Sarah didn't notice their stares or the spreading puddle at her feet. All she could see was Emma's face, matured by 18 years but unmistakably her daughter's, staring back at her from the glossy pages of a fashion magazine. "Mrs. Hayes? Are you all right?" The voice belonged to Janet Morrison, the head librarian who had known Sarah since high school. Janet's weathered face creased with concern as she hurried over with a roll of paper towels. Sarah couldn't speak. She held the magazine with both hands, afraid that if she blinked, the image would disappear like so many dreams before it. The model's eyes were the same shade of green that Sarah remembered, the same eyes that had looked up at her trustingly. Every morning when she dropped Emma off at Little Angel's, "I need to make a phone call," Sarah finally managed, her voice barely above a whisper. She left Janet to clean up the spilled coffee and walked unsteadily to the library's front desk. The magazine clutched against her chest. Her purse was in the drawer beneath the circulation computer, and her hands shook so badly that it took 3 attempts to find her cell phone. Detective Ray Morrison, Janet's younger brother, and the only police officer in Millbrook who still occasionally mentioned Emma's case, answered on the second ring. "Ray, it's Sarah Hayes. I think I found Emma." Detective Ray Morrison had been expecting this call for 18 years, though he'd hoped he would never receive it. Sarah Hayes called him at least twice a year, usually around Emma's birthday in March and again around the anniversary of her disappearance in October. Each time, she was certain she'd spotted her daughter in a grocery store, at a movie theater, walking down a street in Burlington or Montreal. Each time, Ray had followed up dutifully, knowing the calls would lead nowhere but unable to ignore the desperate hope in Sarah's voice. He'd learned to respond with patience and kindness, remembering the young mother who had collapsed in the Little Angel's parking lot when they'd told her Emma was gone. But this call felt different. "Sarah, slow down," Ray said, settling back in his desk chair at the Millbrook Police Department. The small station house was quiet on this Tuesday afternoon, with only himself and part-time officer Jenny Walsh on duty. "Tell me what you found." "She's in Vogue magazine, Ray. The October issue, page 47. There's a fashion spread and she's there. She's calling herself Chloe Richardson, but it's Emma. I know it's Emma." Ray had already opened his desk drawer and was reaching for his keys. Sarah's voice had a quality he'd never heard before, not the desperate hope of previous calls, but something closer to certainty. And after 18 years of investigating Emma's disappearance, Ray had learned to trust his instincts about people, especially about Sarah Hayes. "I'll be right there," he said. The drive from the police station, To the library took less than 5 minutes through Millbrook's quiet downtown streets. Ray parked his cruiser in front of the granite steps and found Sarah waiting for him in the lobby, the magazine spread open on a small reading table. Ray had known Sarah since they were children. She'd been 3 years ahead of him in school, the kind of girl who was nice to everyone and volunteered for every charity drive. Even after Emma's disappearance had aged her beyond her years, she remained one of the kindest people in Millbrook, which made what he saw when he looked at the magazine all the more remarkable. The resemblance was undeniable. The model in the photograph had Emma's distinctive bone structure, the same delicate features that had made her such a beautiful child. But it was more than that. Ray pulled out his phone and scrolled through the Emma Hayes case file he kept stored in his photos, images he'd looked at so many times he could see them with his eyes closed. "The birthmark," Sarah whispered, pointing to the barely visible crescent shape below the model's collarbone. "She had it when she was born. The doctor said it would fade, but it never did. I used to tell her it was where an angel had kissed her before she came to Earth." Ray studied the image carefully. He'd seen enough false leads to be cautious, but this was different. The birthmark matched the medical records they had on file. The facial structure was consistent with age progression photos the FBI had created years ago, and the timing was right. If Emma had been 3 when she disappeared, she would be 21 now. "What do we know about this Chloe Richardson?" Ray asked. Sarah handed him a piece of paper. "I called Elite Modeling Boston. They said she's been with them for 2 years, originally from New Hampshire, but they couldn't give me more details without her permission. They said she's working on a campaign in New York this week." Ray nodded slowly. "Sarah, I need you to understand something. Even if this is Emma, and I'm not saying it's not, she might not remember you. She was very young when she disappeared, and we don't know what she's been through in the last 18 years. "I know," Sarah said quietly. "But she's alive. Ray, after all this time, she's alive." They sat in silence for a moment, both staring at the photograph. Ray was already mentally cataloging the steps he would need to take: contact the FBI, reach out to Elite Modeling, possibly coordinate with New York police. The Emma Hayes case had never been officially closed, which meant he had jurisdiction to investigate any credible leads, and this was more than credible. "I'll make some calls," Ray said finally. "But Sarah, I need you to promise me something. Don't contact the modeling agency again. Don't try to reach out to her directly. If this is Emma, and if someone has been keeping her all these years, approaching her the wrong way could put her in danger." Sarah's face went pale. "You think whoever took her still has control over her?" "I don't know, but we're going to find out." The Elite Modeling Agency occupied the 4th floor of a glass tower in Boston's financial district, its sleek reception area designed to intimidate and impress. Ray Morrison felt out of place in his Millbrook Police Department uniform, surrounded by impossibly tall, impossibly beautiful people who moved through the space like exotic birds. He'd driven the 3 hours from Vermont to Boston that morning, after spending most of the previous night on the phone with FBI Special Agent Linda Chen, who had worked the original Emma Hayes case. Chen was now based in Boston, which made coordination easier, though she'd cautioned Ray about getting his hopes up. "We've had hundreds of leads over the years," she'd reminded him, "most of them from well-meaning people who think they've spotted her. But I'll meet you at the agency tomorrow morning." Now Ray sat across from Marcus Webb, Elite Modeling's Director of Talent Acquisition, while Agent Chen took notes on her tablet. Webb was a thin man in his 50s, with perfectly styled silver hair and the kind of nervous energy that comes from too much caffeine and too little sleep. "Chloe has been with us for just over 2 years, Webb was saying, scrolling through files on his computer. "She came to us through a smaller agency in Manchester, New Hampshire. Beautiful girl, very professional, never any problems. What can you tell us about her background?" Agent Chen asked. Webb frowned slightly. "Well, that's the thing. Chloe is what we call a closed book. She doesn't talk much about her past, and we don't push our models for personal information unless it affects their work. She listed her emergency. Contact as Richard Brennan, her guardian from New Hampshire." Ray felt his pulse quicken. "Guardian?" "Yes, apparently she was raised by him after her parents died in a car accident when she was young. Tragic story, really, but she's remarkably well adjusted for someone who's been through so much trauma." Agent Chen and Ray exchanged glances. Do you have contact information for this guardian? Chen asked. Webb hesitated. I'm not sure I should be sharing that without Chloe's permission. Mr. Webb, Ray said quietly, we have reason to believe that Chloe may be a missing person from Vermont, a child who was abducted 18 years ago. If that's the case, then this Richard Brennan isn't her guardian. He's her kidnapper. The color drained from Webb's face. You can't be serious. Agent Chen leaned forward. We're very serious, Mr. Webb, and we need that contact information. Webb turned back to his computer with shaking fingers. Richard Brennan, address in Keene, New Hampshire. Phone number is... He rattled off the digits while Chen typed them into her tablet. Where is Chloe now? Ray asked. She's in New York working on a cosmetics campaign for Revlon. She's staying at the Marriott in Times Square through the end of the week. Ray stood up. Mr. Webb, I need you to not contact Chloe about this conversation, and I need you to not contact Richard Brennan. This is now an active investigation, and interfering with it could be considered obstruction of justice. Webb nodded. Rapidly. Of course. But Officer Morrison, if Chloe really is this missing girl, if she's been kidnapped all these years, she has no idea, does she? She thinks Richard is her guardian. She thinks her parents are dead. That's what we're trying to figure out, Agent Chen said gently. As they left the modeling agency, Ray felt the familiar mixture of hope and dread that had characterized the Emma Hayes case from the beginning. They had a name now, Richard Brennan, and an address, but they also had a young woman who had been living a lie for 18 years, who might not even remember her real identity. What's our next move? Ray asked as they walked to their cars. I'm going to run Richard Brennan through our databases, see what comes up, Chen replied. You should head back to Vermont and talk to Sarah Hayes. We need to be prepared for the possibility that even if this is Emma, she might not want to be found. She might have developed Stockholm Syndrome, or she might simply have built a life she doesn't want to lose. Ray nodded, though the thought made his stomach clench. And if it's not her? Then we go back to square one like we have so many times before. But as Ray drove north on I-89 toward Vermont, he couldn't shake the feeling that this time was different. The photograph in the magazine had shown more than just a physical resemblance. There had been something in the model's eyes, a quality that reminded him of the sweet, trusting child who had vanished from Little Angel's nursery 18 years ago. Somewhere in New Hampshire, Richard Brennan was going about his daily life, probably unaware that his world was about to be turned upside down. And in New York City, a young woman named Chloe Richardson was posing for photographs, not knowing that her past was finally catching up to her. Richard Brennan's house sat at the end of a long gravel driveway in rural Keene, New Hampshire, surrounded by 40 acres of pine forest that provided perfect privacy from neighbors and curious eyes. The two-story colonial was well maintained but unremarkable, the kind of home that wouldn't draw attention from passing strangers. Agent Chen had called Ray at 6 in the morning with the results of her background check on Brennan. The information had been disturbing enough to prompt an immediate surveillance operation. He's 58 years old, never married, no children, Chen had reported. He works as a freelance accountant, mostly for small businesses in the area. Clean criminal record. But here's the interesting part. He moved to Keene in November 2005, just 1 month after Emma Hayes disappeared, paid cash for the house. Now Ray sat in an unmarked FBI van parked half a mile from Brennan's property, watching the house through high-powered binoculars while Agent Chen coordinated with the New Hampshire State Police. They'd been in position since dawn, but the house showed no signs of activity. Vehicle registration shows he drives a 2018 Honda Accord, Chen said, checking her notes. But there's no car in the driveway. Ray lowered the binoculars. Could be in the garage, or he could be away. Chloe's still in New York through Friday, Chen reminded him. If Brennan has been controlling her life, he might feel safe traveling while she's working. The radio crackled with an update from the state police surveillance team positioned at the other end of Brennan's road. No movement observed. House appears unoccupied. Ray felt the familiar frustration of police work. Long periods of waiting punctuated by moments of intense activity. But something about this case felt different, more urgent. Maybe it was the way Sarah Hayes had looked when she'd shown him the magazine, Or maybe it was his own need for closure after 18 years of dead ends. "Tell me about the house, Ray," said Chen. Consulted her tablet. "Purchased November 15, 2005 for $285,000 cash. Property records show it was built in 1987, 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, full basement. Previous owner was an elderly woman who died intestate. The estate sale was handled by a Boston law firm." "Full basement," Ray repeated. "That's where he would have kept her initially. Isolated property, soundproof basement, no close neighbors. We're getting ahead of ourselves," Chen cautioned. "We don't even know if this is the right person yet." But as Ray studied the house through the binoculars, he noticed details that made his skin crawl. The windows on the lower level were smaller than typical basement windows, and several appeared to have been bricked over from the inside. The yard was immaculately maintained, but there were no personal touches, no garden decorations, no children's toys, nothing that suggested a family lived there. "Chen," Ray said quietly, "I think we need to get a search warrant." Before Chen could respond, her phone buzzed with a text message. She read it quickly, then looked up with a grim expression. That was the NYPD. They just spoke with the Revlon people. "Chloe Richardson never showed up for her shoot yesterday. She's missing." Ray felt ice form in his stomach. "Has anyone contacted Brennan?" Chen was already dialing. "NYPD is checking the hotel now." She put the phone to her ear and waited. "Detective Murphy, it's Chen. What's the status on Richardson?" She listened for a moment, then covered the phone. "A hotel says she checked out yesterday morning, 2 days early. Left no forwarding address." Ray grabbed his radio. "All units, be advised we have a possible kidnapping in progress. Richard Brennan may have taken Chloe Richardson from New York City within the last 24 hours. Chen finished her call and immediately began dialing another number. "I'm calling for an emergency search warrant," she said. "Judge Morrison, Keen owes me a favor." While Chen worked on the legal aspects, Ray continued studying the house. The afternoon sun was casting long shadows across the property, and something about the light made him notice an inconsistency. The foundation on the east side of the house looked newer than the rest, as if it had been modified or reinforced. "Chen," he said, "I think he's expanded the basement." She looked up from her phone call. "What?" "Look at the foundation line. The east side has been rebuilt, probably to add more space underground. If you were going to keep someone captive for 18 years, you'd need more than a standard basement." Chen finished her call and grabbed her binoculars. After studying the house for several minutes, she nodded grimly. "You're right. And see those vents near the foundation? They're not standard basement vents. They're designed for long-term air circulation." Ray's radio crackled again. "Detective Morrison, this is State Police Unit 7. We have a visual on a Honda Accord approaching the target location." Both agents tensed. Through the binoculars, Ray could see a silver car turning into Brennan's driveway, moving slowly over the gravel. The car stopped near the front door, and a single figure got out, a middle-aged man in a dark jacket and jeans. "That's our target," Chen said. "Richard Brennan." But as they watched, another figure emerged from the passenger side of the car. Even at a distance, Ray could see the blonde hair and slender build of a young woman. "Is that Chloe?" Chen asked. Ray adjusted the focus on his binoculars, his hands steady despite his racing pulse. The young woman looked tired and moved with the slow, careful steps of someone who wasn't entirely willing to be where she was. "Chen," Ray said quietly, "we need to move. Now." The basement of Richard Brennan's house had been designed with meticulous care over the course of 18 years. What had started as a standard cellar had been transformed into something far more elaborate, a series of connected rooms that could house a person comfortably, if unwillingly, for decades. Special. Agent Chen led the tactical team through the front door after Brennan had been taken into custody without resistance. The man had seemed almost relieved when they'd surrounded him in his driveway, as if he'd been waiting for this moment for years. Chloe Richardson, or Emma Hayes, had been found in what appeared to be a sitting room in the basement, decorated with furniture that looked like it belonged in a teenager's bedroom from the early 2000s. She'd been reading a book when they'd entered, looking up with confusion rather than fear. "I don't understand," she'd said in a voice that Ray remembered from his dreams. Richard said we were just visiting here. He said we'd be going back to Boston tomorrow. Now Ray stood in the main basement room, trying to process what he was seeing. The space was larger than most apartments, with a full kitchen, living area, bedroom and bathroom. Everything was clean and well maintained, decorated in soft pastels that might have appealed to a young girl. But there were bars on the windows that had been painted to look decorative. The door at the top of the stairs had 3 separate locks, and Ray could see where additional locks had been installed and removed over the years. A bookshelf held hundreds of volumes, mostly classic literature and educational texts. "Look at this," Agent Chen called from what appeared to be a study area. Ray joined her at a desk covered with notebooks and textbooks. The notebooks were filled with handwriting that grew progressively more mature over the years, math problems, essay assignments, book reports. The textbooks covered subjects from elementary through college level. "He homeschooled her," Ray said. "More than that," Chen replied, flipping through one of the notebooks. "He created an entire curriculum. Look at this." She showed him a notebook, labeled Emma's Journal, age 12. The entries were typical of a preteen girl: complaints about homework, excitement about books she'd read, questions about the outside world, but they were signed Emma, not Chloe. Ray felt his knees weaken. She knew, she's always known who she was. "Ray, you need to see this." Chen had moved to a wall covered with photographs. They showed the progression of a child growing into a young woman, but they weren't typical family photos. They were formal portraits, taken against the same backdrop, showing careful documentation of growth and development. And in every single photograph, the subject looked unhappy. "This is documentation," Chen said quietly, like he was keeping records for someone. Ray studied the photos more carefully. The most recent ones showed Chloe Emma as she appeared in the modeling magazine, but her expression was guarded, almost fearful. "Chen, I don't think he was working alone." Before she could respond, they heard voices from upstairs. Ray and Chen climbed the basement stairs to find Dr. Patricia Reeves, a FBI psychologist, speaking quietly with the young woman they'd found. "She's agreed to talk to us," Dr. Reeves said. "But she's very confused about what's happening. She says Richard told her that her parents died when she was 3 and that he's been caring for her ever since. She has no memory of being kidnapped." Ray looked at the young woman sitting on Brennan's living room couch. Up close, the resemblance to Emma Hayes was even more striking, but there was something different about her manner. A careful, controlled way of moving and speaking that seemed unnatural for someone her age. "Chloe," Ray said gently, sitting down across from her, "do you remember a place called Little Angel's Nursery in Vermont?" She shook her head. "I've never been to Vermont." "Richard, and I've always lived in New Hampshire. Do you remember a woman named Sarah, your mother?" For just a moment, something flickered across her face. Confusion, maybe even recognition. But then it was gone. "My mother died in a car accident when I was 3. Richard has newspaper clippings about it." Dr. Reeves leaned forward. "Chloe, those newspaper clippings might not be real. Sometimes people create false documents to support a story they want someone to believe. But why would Richard lie to me?" The question was asked with genuine bewilderment, and Ray realized how carefully Brennan had constructed her reality over the years. Agent Chen returned from the basement, carrying a box of documents. "Ray, we found something you need to see." She pulled out a folder labeled Emma's Education Plan and opened it. Inside were detailed schedules, lesson plans, and progress reports covering 18 years of homeschooling. But more disturbing were the behavioral modification notes. Entries like, "Emma became upset when I mentioned her real family," "removed television privileges for 1 week to discourage this line of thinking," and "Emma asked about other children again, explained that the outside world is dangerous and that she's safer here with me." Ray looked up at Chloe, who was watching them with growing alarm. "What are those papers about me?" "Chloe," Dr. Reeves said carefully, "your name isn't Chloe Richardson. Your name is Emma Hayes. You were taken from a daycare center in Vermont when you were 3 years old. The man you know as Richard isn't your guardian. He kidnapped you." The young woman stared at them for a long moment, then began shaking her head. No, that's not possible. Richard saved me. After my parents died, he took care of me. He protected me. But even as she said the words, Ray could see doubt creeping into her eyes. 18 years of conditioning was beginning to crack under the weight of evidence. "Emma," Ray said softly, using her real name for the first time. "There's someone who's been looking for you for 18 years. Someone who never stopped believing she'd find you again." "Who?" "Your mother. Your real mother. Her name is Sarah Hayes, and she loves you more than anything in the world." Sarah Hayes had not slept in the 3 days since Agent Chen had called to tell her that Emma had been found. She'd paced her small apartment in Millbrook, cleaned everything twice, and prepared dozens of meals that she'd been too nervous to eat. Now she sat in the passenger seat of Detective Morrison's cruiser, driving toward the FBI field office in Boston, and tried to control the trembling in her hands. "What if she doesn't remember me?" Sarah asked for the 10th time in the past hour. Ray glanced at her sympathetically. "Dr. Reeves says that's possible. She was very young when she was taken, and Brennan worked hard to erase her memories of her life before. But Sarah, even if she doesn't remember you consciously, there might be deeper memories. A mother-child bond doesn't just disappear." Sarah clutched the manila envelope in her lap, filled with photographs of Emma as a toddler and mementos from her brief 3 years of life. She'd also brought Emma's favorite stuffed animal, a purple elephant named Peanut that had been with her the day she disappeared, though it had never been found at the daycare. "Tell me again what she said when you showed her the photos," Sarah requested. "She looked at them for a long time," Ray replied. "She said she thought she might have seen some of the locations before, maybe in dreams. And when Dr. Reeves showed her the picture of you holding her on her 2nd birthday, she started crying. She couldn't explain why." They pulled into the parking garage of the federal building, and Sarah felt her stomach clench with anxiety. After 18 years of wondering if Emma was alive or dead, healthy or hurt, she was about to see her daughter again. But the woman she was about to meet was no longer the 3-year-old who had been taken from Little Angel's nursery. She was an adult who had been raised by her kidnapper, who believed lies about her past, who might not want to reconnect with the life she'd been stolen from. Agent Chen met them in the lobby, her expression carefully neutral. "Sarah, I need to prepare you for this meeting. Emma, she still prefers to be called Chloe, is struggling to accept what we've told her about her past. She's agreed to see you, but she's frightened and confused." "Is she okay?" Sarah asked. "Physically, I mean. Did he hurt her?" "Physically, she appears to be healthy. Brennan took good care of her in that regard. But psychologically, the damage is significant. She's been isolated from the outside world for 18 years. The modeling work was the first time she'd been allowed to interact with people without Brennan's supervision, and even then he carefully controlled her interactions. They took the elevator to the 3rd floor, and Chen led them to a conference room with a one-way mirror. Sarah could see into an adjacent room where a young woman sat at a table with Dr. Reeves. Sarah's breath caught in her throat. Emma was beautiful, just as Sarah had always imagined she would be. Her blonde hair was longer now, reaching past her shoulders, and she'd grown tall and slender, but her face was unmistakably the face Sarah had kissed goodnight every evening for 3 years. The same green eyes, the same delicate features, the same small scar on her chin from a fall when she was 2. "She looks so much like you," Ray said softly. Sarah pressed her hand against the glass, wishing she could reach through and touch her daughter. "She looks sad. Dr. Reeves says that's normal. Emma's entire reality has been shattered. Everything she believed about her life has turned out to be a lie. It's going to take time for her to process that." Agent Chen opened the door to the observation room. "Are you ready? Remember, don't push too hard. Let her set the pace." Sarah nodded and followed Chen into the adjoining room. Emma looked up as they entered, and for a moment, mother and daughter simply stared at each other across 18 years of separation. Sarah had imagined this moment countless times, but she'd never expected it to be so quiet. In her dreams, there had always been tears and embraces and declarations of love. Instead, Emma looked at her with polite curiosity, as if she were meeting a stranger. "Hello," Emma said softly. "Hello, sweetheart," Sarah replied, her voice thick with emotion. She sat down across the table, careful not to get too close. "You're so beautiful. You've grown up to be such a beautiful young woman." Emma studied her face carefully. Dr. Reeves says you're my mother. I am. I've been looking for you every day for 18 years. I don't remember you, Emma said, but there was uncertainty in her voice. Sarah opened the manila envelope and pulled out a photograph. This was taken on your 3rd birthday, about 6 months before you disappeared. We had a party in the backyard and you insisted on wearing your princess dress. Emma took the photograph and stared at it for a long time. In the picture, she was sitting on Sarah's lap, both of them laughing at something off camera. She was wearing a pink tulle dress and a plastic tiara, and she looked completely happy. I remember this dress, Emma said suddenly. I remember spinning around in it. The skirt would flare out. Sarah felt tears streaming down her face. You loved that dress. You wore it everywhere, to the grocery store, to daycare, even to bed sometimes. I had to wash it constantly. Emma continued studying the photograph. And this is you? Yes. Baby, that's me. You look different now, Sarah managed a small laugh. 18 years will do that. You look different too. Emma set the photograph down and looked directly at Sarah for the first time. If you're really my mother, why didn't you find me? Why did it take so long? The question hit Sarah like a physical blow. Oh, Emma. Honey, I never stopped looking. The police, the FBI, hundreds of volunteers. We searched everywhere. We never gave up hope that you were alive, but we had no idea where you were. Richard hid you very well. Richard said my parents died in a car accident. He showed me newspaper articles. Those articles were fake, sweetheart. Your father and I divorced when you were 2, but we're both alive. We both love you very much. Emma was quiet for several minutes, processing this information. Finally, she looked up again. What happens now? That's up to you, Sarah said. I know this is overwhelming. I know your whole life has been turned upside down, but I want you to know that I'm here, and I'm not going anywhere. Whatever you need, whatever you want to do, I'll support you. Emma nodded slowly. Can I think about it? This is all very confusing. Of course, baby, take all the time you need. As they prepared to leave, Emma spoke up one more time. Sarah. Yes? In my dreams, I sometimes see a woman with brown hair who sings to me. She has a soft voice, and she smells like vanilla. Is that you? Sarah's heart nearly stopped. I used to sing you to sleep every night, and I always wore vanilla perfume. Emma nodded thoughtfully. I think I might remember you, after all. Richard Brennan sat in the interrogation room at the Keene Police Department, his hands folded calmly on the metal table. He was a slight man with thinning brown hair and glasses, the kind of person who would blend into any crowd. Looking at him, Ray Morrison found it hard to believe this ordinary-seeming individual had stolen a child and held her captive for 18 years. Agent Chen had been questioning Brennan for 3 hours, but he'd said nothing beyond asking for his lawyer. Tao Ray sat across from him, hoping that a different approach might yield results. Richard, Ray began, I've been investigating Emma's disappearance for 18 years. I know Sarah Hayes. I've seen what losing her daughter did to her. Help me understand why you did this. Brennan looked up for the first time since Ray had entered the room. His eyes were pale blue and surprisingly calm. I saved her, he said quietly. Ray felt his jaw clench. You kidnapped her. I saved her from a world that would have destroyed her, Brennan continued as if Ray hadn't spoken. Do you know what happens to beautiful little girls in this world? Do you know what men do to them? Emma was safe with her mother, Brennan shook his head. Sarah Hayes was a single mother working 2 jobs. Emma spent 10 hours a day at that daycare, surrounded by strangers. Anyone could have hurt her there. Ray pulled out his notepad. Is that why you took her? Because you thought she wasn't safe? Watched her for weeks, Brennan said, his voice taking on a dreamy quality. She was the most beautiful child I'd ever seen. So innocent, so pure. The other children at the daycare were rough with her, and the teachers barely paid attention. She deserved better. She deserved to stay with her family. I gave her a better family, Brennan snapped, showing the first flash of anger. I gave her everything she needed. Education, protection, love. She was happy with me. Ray thought about the basement prison he'd seen, about the bars on the windows and the locks on the doors. She was your prisoner, Richard. You stole 18 years of her life. I gave her 18 years of safety, Brennan's voice rose. Do you know what would have happened to her out there? She would have been corrupted, used, discarded. I protected her from all of that. What about the modeling? Why did you let her do that? Brennan's expression softened. Emma is so beautiful. She deserved to be seen, to be appreciated. But I was always careful. I chose her assignments, controlled who she worked with. I made sure she was safe. Ray studied the man across from him, trying to understand the twisted logic that had driven him to destroy so many lives. Were you planning to keep her forever? I hoped she would understand eventually. I hoped she would see that everything I did was for her own good. And if she didn't, if she wanted to leave? Brennan was quiet for a long moment. Emma would never want to leave me. I'm all she has. Ray leaned forward. Her name isn't Emma anymore, Richard. She calls herself Chloe. You even took away her name. I had to protect her identity. If anyone had discovered who she really was, they would have returned her to her mother where she belonged. Brennan shook his head sadly. You don't understand. Sarah Hayes gave up on Emma years ago. She moved on with her life. Emma needed someone who would never give up on her. Ray felt anger surge through him. Sarah never gave up. She called me twice a year, every year, asking if there were any new leads. She never stopped looking. For the first time, Brennan looked uncertain. That's not possible. It's the truth. Sarah Hayes has spent 18 years hoping her daughter would come home. Brennan stared at the table for several minutes. When he looked up again, his eyes were filled with something that might have been regret. I thought no one was looking anymore. I thought she was forgotten. She was never forgotten, Richard. Not for a single day. Agent Chen re-entered the room, carrying a thick file folder. Mr. Brennan, we've been examining your computers and your documents. We know this isn't the first time you've done something like this. Brennan's face went white. I don't know what you mean. Chen opened the folder and pulled out several photographs. Rebecca Martinez, age 4, disappeared from a playground in Hartford, Connecticut in 1998. Kellyanne Foster, age 6, vanished from a shopping mall in Providence, Rhode Island in 2001. Both cases remain unsolved. I've never heard of those children. Really? Because we found their photographs in your basement, along with detailed notes about their daily routines, their families, their schedules. Ray felt sick. There were others. Chen nodded grimly. We're still analyzing the evidence, but it appears Mr. Brennan has been stalking and possibly abducting children for over 20 years. Emma may not have been his first victim. Brennan began shaking his head frantically. No, you don't understand. I only took Emma. The others, I was just watching them, making sure they were safe. Making sure they were safe or planning to take them too. I would never hurt a child, Brennan said desperately. Everything I did was to protect them. Ray stood up abruptly. He couldn't listen to any more of Brennan's justifications. Outside the interrogation room, he found Agent Chen reviewing more documents from Brennan's house. How many? Ray asked. We're not sure yet. He has files on at least a dozen children spanning 25 years. Most of them seem to be surveillance only, but Rebecca Martinez and Kellyanne Foster, she shook her head. Their files are much more detailed, more like what we found for Emma. Are they still alive? We don't know. We're coordinating with local departments in Connecticut and Rhode Island to search for any properties Brennan might have owned or rented in those areas. Ray sank into a chair, overwhelmed by the scope of Brennan's crimes. Emma's case had consumed 18 years of his life, but she might not have been the only victim. There might be other families who had spent decades wondering what happened to their children. Chen, Ray said quietly, we need to find those other girls. We will, she replied. But right now, our priority is helping Emma adjust to her new reality. Dr. Reeves says the next few weeks are going to be crucial for her psychological recovery. Ray nodded, thinking about the young woman who was trying to reconcile 18 years of lies with the truth about her identity. Emma Hayes had survived her captivity, but the real challenge was just beginning. She had to learn how to live in a world she'd been taught to fear, with people she'd been told were dead, carrying memories that she'd been conditioned to forget. And somewhere, there might be other victims of Richard Brennan's twisted need to protect children, still waiting to be found. The safe house where Emma was staying looked like any other suburban home in Burlington, Vermont, but the discreet security cameras and unmarked police cars parked nearby revealed its true purpose. Dr. Patricia Reeves had recommended the location as a neutral space where Emma could begin processing her recovery without the pressure of media attention or well-meaning relatives. Sarah Hayes visited every day, sometimes sitting quietly while Emma read or worked on puzzles, sometimes sharing stories about Emma's early childhood. The process was slow and often painful, as Emma struggled to reconcile the memories that were slowly returning with the life she'd known for 18 years. "I remember a song," Emma said on Thursday afternoon, looking up from a photo album Sarah had brought. "Someone used to sing about twinkle stars." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. "Twinkle, twinkle, little star. It was your favorite lullaby. I sang it to you every night before bed." Emma nodded slowly. "I used to hum it sometimes in the basement. Richard didn't like it when I hummed songs I couldn't explain where I'd learned them. They were sitting in the safe house living room with Dr. Reeves taking notes nearby." The FBI psychologist had explained that Emma's memories were returning in fragments, triggered by photographs, sounds, or smells that connected to her early childhood. "Tell me about the basement," Dr. Reeves said gently. "What was it like living there?" Emma was quiet for a moment, organizing her thoughts. "It wasn't terrible," she said finally. "Richard made sure I had everything I needed: books, educational programs, good food. But I was never allowed upstairs when he had visitors, and I couldn't go outside without him." "Did you ever try to leave?" Sarah asked. "When I was younger, yes, but the doors were locked, and Richard explained that the outside world was dangerous. He showed me news stories about children who had been hurt or killed. He said I was safer with him." Dr. Reeves leaned forward. "Emma, you understand now that those stories were chosen specifically to frighten you, that the world isn't as dangerous as Richard made it seem. Intellectually, yes, but it's hard to change feelings I've had for 18 years. Sometimes when I look out the window here, I feel panic, like something terrible is going to happen if I go outside." Sarah reached across the table and gently touched Emma's hand. "We'll help you work through that. We have all the time in the world." Emma looked down at their joined hands. "I keep expecting to wake up and find out this is all a dream, that I'm still in the basement and you're just someone I imagined." "I'm real, sweetheart. This is real." Agent Chen arrived that afternoon with updates on the investigation. She found Emma and Sarah in the kitchen, where Emma was tentatively helping to prepare dinner, the first time she'd cooked anything more complex than the simple meals she'd been allowed to make in the basement. "How are you feeling today, Emma?" Chen asked. "Confused," Emma replied honestly, "but maybe a little hopeful too." Chen nodded approvingly. "That's normal. I have some news that might be difficult to hear, but I think you're strong enough to handle it." Emma set down the vegetable peeler she'd been using and gave Chen her full attention. "We found evidence that Richard had been watching other children before he took you. We're not sure yet if he actually abducted anyone else, but we're investigating cases in Connecticut and Rhode Island." Emma went very still. "You mean I wasn't the only one?" "We don't know yet. But Emma, I want you to understand that none of this was your fault. Richard Brennan made his own choices, and he's responsible for the consequences. But if I had tried harder to escape, if I had fought back more—" "You were 3 years old when he took you," Sarah interrupted firmly. "You were a baby. There was nothing you could have done." Dr. Reeves added her professional perspective. "Emma, survivor's guilt is common in cases like this, but you survived 18 years of captivity, and that took incredible strength. You have nothing to be ashamed of." Emma was quiet for several minutes processing this information. Finally, she looked up at Agent Chen. "If there are other girls, will you find them?" "We're going to try. What can I do to help?" Chen exchanged glances with Dr. Reeves. "Right now, your job is to focus on your own recovery. But if you remember anything about Richard's behavior that might help us understand his methods, that could be valuable." Emma nodded thoughtfully. "He was very organized. He kept detailed records of everything, my education, my health, my behavior, and he was always careful about security. He never did anything spontaneously. That's helpful, Chen said. It suggests that if he did take other children, he would have prepared extensively for it. After Chen left, Emma and Sarah continued preparing dinner together. It was a simple meal, spaghetti with tomato sauce. But for Sarah, it represented something profound. She was cooking with her daughter for the first time in 18 years. Sarah, Emma said as they worked, what was I like? Before, I mean, as a little girl. Sarah smiled, remembering. You were fearless. You climbed everything. Chairs, tables, playground equipment. You loved books and you always wanted me to read the same stories over and over. You were incredibly affectionate. You gave hugs to everyone, even strangers in the grocery store. I don't feel fearless now. Courage isn't the absence of fear, sweetheart. It's doing what needs to be done despite being afraid. And you're one of the bravest people I've ever known. Emma looked at her curiously. How can you say that? You barely know who I am now. I know that you survived 18 years of captivity without losing your capacity for kindness. I know that you're sitting here in an unfamiliar place with people you're still learning to trust because you're brave enough to rebuild your life. I know that you're my daughter, and I'm proud of you. Emma began crying then. The first tears. Sarah had seen her shed since their reunion, but they weren't tears of sadness. They were tears of relief, of recognition, of a connection that 18 years of separation couldn't break. I think I remember you, Emma whispered. Not everything, but I remember feeling safe. I remember someone who made me feel loved. Sarah pulled her daughter into her arms, and for the first time in 18 years, she held Emma close. They stayed that way for a long time, mother and daughter, finally beginning the long journey back to each other. The media attention began on Friday morning when a reporter from the Burlington Free Press somehow learned that Emma Hayes had been found alive. By noon, news vans were parked outside the FBI field office, and by evening the story had gone national. Missing girl found after 18 years in basement prison, read the headline on CNN's website, alongside Emma's modeling photographs and childhood pictures that Sarah had provided to the FBI. Dr. Reeves found Emma sitting in the safe house living room, staring at her own face on the television screen. The young woman looked overwhelmed by the magnitude of attention her story was receiving. This is strange, Emma said quietly. Seeing myself on the news. How do you feel about it? Doctor, Reeves asked. Exposed. For 18 years, almost no one knew I existed. Now millions of people are talking about me. The news coverage was intense but largely sympathetic. Emma's story had captured the public imagination, the beautiful young woman who had survived nearly 2 decades of captivity, the mother who had never given up hope, the dramatic rescue that reunited them. But the attention also brought complications. Within hours of the first news reports, the FBI had received hundreds of tips from people claiming to have information about other missing children connected to Richard Brennan. Most would prove to be false leads, but each one had to be investigated. Agent Chen arrived at the safe house that evening with a proposal. Emma, we've been contacted by several news organizations requesting interviews. Obviously, you're under no obligation to speak to anyone, but there's something to consider. What's that? Emma asked. If Richard Brennan did take other children, publicity about your case might encourage witnesses to come forward. Someone might remember seeing him in their area, or recall suspicious behavior that didn't seem important at the time. Emma looked to Sarah, who was sitting beside her on the couch. What do you think? I think it's entirely your decision, Sarah replied. You don't owe anyone your story. But if it could help find other girls like me. Dr. Reeves leaned forward. Emma, you're still in the early stages of recovery. A media interview would be stressful under the best circumstances, and your situation is far from normal. I'd recommend waiting at least a few more weeks. Emma nodded, but Chen could see she was thinking seriously about the possibility. Agent Chen, what kind of information are you hoping to get from the public? Anything that might help us establish Brennan's movements over the past 25 years. We know he lived in at least 3 different states, but there might be places we haven't discovered yet. We're particularly interested in the years before he took you, 1995 to 2005. Why those years specifically? Chen hesitated, then decided Emma deserved to know the truth, because that's when Rebecca Martinez and Kellyanne Foster disappeared. If we can place Brennan in Connecticut and Rhode Island during those time periods, it would strengthen our case. Emma was quiet for several minutes. Finally, she looked up with determination. I want to do the interview. Emma, you don't have to, Sarah began. Yes, I do, Emma interrupted gently. If there are other girls still trapped somewhere, if there are families still wondering what happened to their children, then I have to try to help them. Dr. Reeves studied Emma carefully. If we do this, it has to be on your terms. You control what questions you answer, and you can stop the interview at any time. I understand. Chen nodded approvingly. I'll coordinate with the media relations team. We'll choose a reporter who has experience with sensitive cases, and we'll do it here at the safe house where you feel comfortable. That night, Sarah lay awake in the guest bedroom of the safe house, thinking about her daughter's decision. She was proud of Emma's courage, but she was also terrified of exposing her to the inevitable scrutiny that would follow a national television interview. Emma had already endured so much, had lost so many years of normal life. Sarah wanted to protect her from any additional pain, but she also recognized that Emma needed to make her own choices about how to move forward. The next morning, Emma woke early and found Sarah in the kitchen making coffee. Are you worried about the interview? Emma asked. A little, Sarah admitted. I just want what's best for you. I keep thinking about those other girls, Emma said. Rebecca and Kellyanne. If they're still alive, they're probably older than I am now. They've been trapped even longer. Sarah poured 2 cups of coffee and handed one to Emma. You're very brave, sweetheart. Braver than I think I would be in your situation. I don't feel brave, I feel scared most of the time. But Richard taught me that fear shouldn't stop you from doing what's right, even though I don't think he meant it the way I'm applying it now. They sat together at the kitchen table, watching the sunrise through the window. It was Emma's first week of real freedom in 18 years, and she was already using it to try to help others. Emma, Sarah said quietly, I want you to know that whatever happens with the interview, whatever comes next, I'm going to be here. You don't have to face any of this alone. Emma reached across the table and took Sarah's hand. I know, and that makes all the difference. Later that morning, Agent Chen called to confirm that they'd arranged an interview with NBC's Lester Holt, scheduled for the following Tuesday. It would be Emma's first public statement about her ordeal, and quite possibly the key to finding other victims of Richard Brennan's crimes, but it would also mark the end of Emma's anonymity, the final step in her transformation from a hidden victim to a public survivor. The world was about to meet Emma Hayes, and she was about to meet the world. The NBC interview was scheduled for Tuesday morning at 10 o'clock. Emma had spent the weekend preparing with Dr. Reeves, practicing how to talk about her experiences without becoming overwhelmed by the emotions they brought up. She'd also worked with a media consultant the FBI had brought in, learning how to stay focused on her message rather than getting distracted by unexpected questions. Lester Holt arrived at the safe house at 9:30, accompanied by a small crew that Agent Chen had personally vetted. Emma watched through the window as they unloaded their equipment, feeling her stomach clench with anxiety. I can still change my mind, can't I? She asked Dr. Reeves. Of course. You can stop this at any time. Sarah sat beside Emma on the couch, offering silent support. Over the past week, mother and daughter had grown closer, though Emma still struggled with memory gaps and occasional confusion about her identity. Some days, she felt like Emma Hayes, the child who had been stolen from Little Angel's nursery. Other days, she felt like Chloe Richardson, the young woman who had spent 18 years believing lies about her past. Just remember, Dr. Reeves said, you're in control of this conversation. You don't have to answer any question that makes you uncomfortable. Lester Holt entered the living room with his characteristic calm professionalism. He spent several minutes talking with Emma off camera, helping her relax and establishing rapport. Emma found him easier to talk to than she'd expected. He didn't push for dramatic details or emotional reactions. We're going to start with some basic questions about your experience, Holt explained. Then I'll ask about your reunion with your mother. And finally, we'll talk about the ongoing investigation. Does that sound manageable? Emma nodded. I want people to understand that Richard Brennan might have hurt other children. That's the most important thing. The cameras began rolling, and Holt introduced the segment. Good morning. I'm here with Emma Hayes, the young woman who was kidnapped at age 3 and held captive for 18 years before being rescued last week. Emma, thank you for being willing to share your story. Thank you for giving me the opportunity, Emma replied, her voice steady despite her nervousness. Let's start at the beginning. Do you have any memories of the day you were taken? Emma shook her head. I was only 3. I have some memories of life before, my mother singing to me, playing in our backyard, the daycare center. But I don't remember the actual kidnapping. What do you remember about your early years with Richard Brennan? He told me that my parents had died in a car accident and that he was my guardian. He created an entire fake history for me, complete with newspaper clippings and legal documents. I had no reason to doubt what he told me. You spent 18 years living in his basement. Can you describe what that was like? Emma paused, choosing her words carefully. It was like living in a very nice prison. I had books, educational materials, comfortable furniture, but I couldn't leave, and I couldn't interact with the outside world except when Richard allowed it. When did you first begin to suspect that something wasn't right? Honestly, only in the last few years. When I started modeling, I met other young women my age, and I realized that my upbringing had been very different from theirs. But I still believed Richard's story about protecting me from a dangerous world. Holt leaned forward slightly. The FBI has evidence that Richard Brennan may have taken other children. What would you want to say to those families? Emma looked directly into the camera. I want them to know that if their children are still alive, they're probably survivors, just like I am. And I want anyone who might have information about Richard Brennan to please contact the FBI. Even small details that might not seem important could help find other victims. What has it been like, reuniting with your mother after 18 years? For the first time during the interview, Emma's composure wavered slightly. It's been wonderful and difficult at the same time. I love my mother, but I'm still learning who I am now. I'm not the same person I would have been if I'd grown up normally. Sarah, Holt said, turning to address Emma's mother, who had been sitting quietly nearby. What has this week been like for you? Sarah's eyes filled with tears. It's been a miracle. For 18 years, I never knew if Emma was alive or dead. Now she's here and she's safe, and she's the remarkable young woman I always knew she would become. Holt turned back to Emma. What are your plans now? How do you rebuild a life after an experience like this? I'm taking it one day at a time, Emma replied. I'm working with Dr. Reeves to process what happened to me, and I'm getting to know my family again. But I also want to use my experience to help other people. If sharing my story can help find other victims or prevent future kidnappings, then something good will have come from what happened to me. Is there anything else you'd like people to know? Emma thought for a moment. I want people to understand that missing children don't just disappear. Somewhere, there are people who know what happened to them. If you have information about any missing child case, please don't assume it's not important. You might be the key to bringing someone home. The interview concluded, and as the crew packed up their equipment, Emma felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion. She'd managed to share her story without breaking down, and she'd gotten her message across about the need to find other potential victims. Agent Chen approached her as the NBC team was leaving. Emma, that was beautifully done. You handled yourself with remarkable grace. Do you think it will help? Emma asked. I think it's going to generate a lot of leads. We're already getting calls at the FBI tip line. That evening, Emma and Sarah watched the interview together on television. Seeing herself on the screen was still surreal for Emma, but she was proud of how she'd presented herself and her message. You were amazing, Sarah said. So poised and articulate. I just hope it helps find Rebecca and Kellyanne, Emma replied, and anyone else who might still be out there. The phone began ringing almost immediately after the interview aired. Agent E. Chen fielded calls from law enforcement agencies in 6 different states, all reporting tips that might be related to Richard Brennan. The investigation was expanding rapidly, but Emma had done her part. Now it was up to the professionals to follow the leads she'd helped generate, to search for other victims of the man who had stolen 18 years of her life. The response to Emma's television interview was overwhelming. Within 24 hours, the FBI had received over 300 tips through their hotline, and law enforcement agencies across New England were reporting calls from citizens who thought they might have information about Richard Brennan. Agent Chen had set up a task force headquarters in Burlington, coordinating with investigators from Connecticut, Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and New Hampshire. The conference room walls were covered with maps, photographs, and timelines as they tried to piece together Brennan's activities over the past 25 years. The good news is that people are responding, Chen told Emma during a debriefing session at the safe house. The challenging news is that most of the tips are going to be false leads, but we only need 1 or 2 solid pieces of information to break this open. Emma had been following the investigation closely, though Dr. Reeves had cautioned her about becoming too emotionally invested in the outcome. Her own recovery was still the priority, but Emma found it difficult to focus on anything else when there might be other victims still in captivity. "Have you found anything promising?" Emma asked. Chen consulted her notes. Several people in Connecticut remember seeing a man matching Brennan's description in the Hartford area around the time Rebecca Martinez disappeared. We're also getting reports from Rhode Island about suspicious activity near Providence in 2001. What kind of suspicious activity? A man asking unusual questions about children's schedules, showing up at playgrounds and schools repeatedly, that sort of thing. Nothing that seemed criminal at the time, but in retrospect, Emma nodded. She understood how Brennan operated. Careful, methodical, patient. He would have spent weeks or months studying potential victims before making his move. Sarah arrived at the safe house that afternoon with news of her own. "Emma, I've been contacted by several other families of missing children. They want to thank you for speaking out, and they're hoping your story might help find their children too." "How many families?" Emma asked. 12 so far. Children who disappeared under circumstances that might be similar to your case. Emma felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. Her decision to go public had opened a door that couldn't be closed again. She was no longer just a survivor. She had become a symbol of hope for other families dealing with unimaginable loss. "I'd like to meet some of them," Emma said. "If they want to meet me." Dr. Reeves looked concerned. "Emma, you're still in early recovery. Taking on the emotional burden of other families' tragedies could be overwhelming. But if I can help them, shouldn't I try?" "Your first responsibility is to yourself," Dr. Reeves replied gently. "You can't help anyone else if you don't take care of your own healing first." That evening, Emma sat alone in her room at the safe house looking through the letters and emails that had been forwarded to her through the FBI. Families from across the country had written to thank her for her courage, to share their own stories of loss, and to ask for her help in keeping their cases in the public eye. One letter particularly caught her attention. It was from Maria Santos, whose 6-year-old daughter Carmen had disappeared from a park in Springfield, Massachusetts, 15 years ago. "Dear Emma," the letter began, "I watched your interview on NBC, and I saw something in your eyes that I recognize. The strength that comes from surviving something unthinkable. My daughter Carmen has been missing for 15 years, and the police have no leads. I know it's a lot to ask, but would you be willing to look at Carmen's case? Sometimes a fresh perspective can see things that others have missed." Emma studied the photograph that Maria Santos had included. A beautiful little girl with dark hair and bright eyes, wearing a yellow dress and holding a stuffed rabbit. Carmen would be 21 now, the same age as Emma. There was a knock on her door and Sarah entered quietly. "You look troubled, sweetheart." Emma showed her mother the letter. "There are so many missing children. How do I choose which cases to get involved with? How do I help everyone who's asking for help?" Sarah sat on the bed beside Emma. "You don't have to help everyone. You've already done something incredible by speaking out about your own experience. Anything else you do is above and beyond." But if I can make a difference, Emma, you're one person. You can't solve every missing child case in America. You have to set boundaries or you'll burn yourself out trying to save everyone. Emma knew Sarah was right, but she also knew she couldn't ignore the letters completely. She'd been given a platform, and with that came responsibility. What if I focused on cases that might be connected to Richard Brennan? Emma suggested. Cases where the circumstances are similar to mine. That seems more manageable, Sarah agreed. But promise me you'll talk to Dr. Reeves before making any commitments. The next morning, Emma met with Agent Chen to discuss her idea. Chen was supportive but cautious. We're already investigating cases that might be connected to Brennan, Chen explained. But if you want to review them and offer your perspective, that could be valuable. You know Brennan's methods better than anyone. I'd like to start with Carmen Santos, Emma said. Her disappearance was in Massachusetts, which is close to the other states where Brennan was active. Chen pulled up Carmen's file on her laptop. Springfield, Massachusetts, June 2009. Carmen Santos, age 6, disappeared from a playground while her mother was talking to another parent. No witnesses, no evidence left behind. Emma studied the case details. That's different from my situation. I was taken from an indoor location with multiple staff members around. This seems more opportunistic. That's what we thought too. But we're still looking into it because of the timing and location. What about Rebecca Martinez and Kellyanne Foster? Have you found anything new about them? Chen's expression grew more serious. We think we found where Rebecca was held. Emma felt her heart skip. Where? Brennan rented a farmhouse in rural Connecticut from 1997 to 2003. We searched it yesterday and found evidence of long-term occupancy in the basement, the same kind of setup he had for you in New Hampshire. Was she there the whole time? We don't know yet. The property has been through several owners since Brennan left, so the evidence is limited. But we found some items that might have belonged to a young girl. Emma felt sick thinking about another child enduring what she had experienced. What about Kellyanne? We're still looking for properties Brennan might have used in Rhode Island. But Emma, you should know, we found something else in the Connecticut house. What? Chen hesitated. Children's clothing. Multiple sizes, multiple ages. It suggests that Brennan might have held more than one child at a time. Emma stared at Chen in horror. You mean there might have been other girls with me? In New Hampshire? We don't know. The basement you were found in was only set up for one person. But Brennan owned that property for 18 years. It's possible that other children were there at different times. Emma felt dizzy. She'd spent 18 years believing she was Brennan's only victim, but now it seemed possible that other children had been imprisoned in the same basement, maybe even tortured in the same rooms where she'd grown up. I need to help you find them, Emma said urgently. All of them. Emma, the best way you can help is by continuing your own recovery and providing information when we ask for it. Let us handle the investigation. But Emma knew she couldn't just sit back and wait. Too many families were still suffering, still wondering what had happened to their children. She had survived Brennan's captivity for a reason, and that reason was becoming clearer every day. She was going to help find the others, no matter what it took. 2 weeks after Emma's television interview, Agent Chen received the call she'd been hoping for. A woman in Warwick, Rhode Island, had contacted the FBI tip line with information about a man she'd seen repeatedly in her neighborhood in 2001, shortly before Kellyanne Foster disappeared. Her name is Patricia Dunham, Chen explained to Emma and Sarah during their regular update meeting. She says a man matching Brennan's description was doing landscaping work in her area, and she remembers him because he seemed more interested in watching the children than doing his job. Emma leaned forward. Did she remember anything specific about him? She said he drove a white van and always worked alone. She also remembered that he asked a lot of questions about the local schools and after-school programs. That sounds like Richard, Emma said grimly. He was always very interested in children's routines. Chen nodded. We're driving down to Rhode Island tomorrow to interview Mrs. Dunham in person. Emma, would you be willing to come with us? Sometimes witnesses remember more details when they have a chance to talk with someone who knew the perpetrator personally. Doctor, Reeves looked concerned. Emma, traveling to crime scenes could be emotionally triggering. Are you sure you're ready for that? Emma considered the question carefully. Over the past 2 weeks, she'd grown stronger and more confident, though she still had difficult days when the reality of her lost years overwhelmed her. But she also felt a growing sense of purpose. "I think I need to do this," Emma said. "If there's any chance it could help find Kellyanne or Rebecca, I have to try." Sarah squeezed her daughter's hand supportively. "I'll come with you." The next morning, they drove south to Rhode Island in a small convoy, Agent Chen and her partner. In one car, Emma and Sarah with Dr. Reeves in another, and 2 state police officers following behind. Emma watched the landscape change as they traveled, thinking about how many times Richard Brennan had driven these same roads, planning his crimes. Patricia Dunham lived in a modest ranch house on a tree-lined street in Warwick. She was a woman, in her 60s with silver hair and worried eyes, and she welcomed them into her living room with nervous hospitality. "I've been thinking about that summer for 2 weeks now, ever since I saw the news about Emma," Mrs. Dunham said. "I keep wondering if I should have called the police back then, when I first noticed that man acting strangely." "You had no way of knowing," Agent Chen said kindly. "Can you tell us exactly what you observed?" Mrs. Dunham pulled out a notebook where she'd been recording her memories. "It was June 2001. This man showed up claiming to be a landscaper, said he was looking for work in the neighborhood, but he never actually did any landscaping that I could see." "What did he do instead?" Emma asked. "He would park his van at the end of the street and just sit there, watching the children walk to and from school. Sometimes he'd get out and walk around, but he always seemed to be timing his walks for when the kids were outside." Agent Chen showed Mrs. Dunham a photograph of Richard Brennan taken around 2001. "Is this the man you saw?" Mrs. Dunham studied the photo carefully. "Yes, that's him. I remember those glasses, and the way he always wore a baseball cap pulled down low." "Did you ever see him interact with any children?" "Not directly, but I remember one day he was standing near the playground when that little girl, Kellyanne, was there with her grandmother. He was pretending to examine a tree, but he was really watching them." Emma felt a chill. "How close was he to Kellyanne?" "Maybe 50 feet away. Close enough to hear their conversation if he was listening." Agent Chen made notes. "Did you see his van on the day Kellyanne disappeared?" Mrs. Dunham nodded grimly. "That's what's been bothering me all these years. I saw that white van parked near the playground that afternoon, but I didn't think anything of it at the time. It wasn't until later that I realized the timing." Emma looked out Mrs. Dunham's front window toward the street, where Brennan had stalked his victims. "Mrs. Dunham, did you ever see any other children around his van? Maybe children who didn't live in the neighborhood?" "Now that you mention it, yes. One time I thought I saw a little girl in the passenger seat, but when I looked again, the van was empty. I figured I'd imagined it." Agent Chen and Emma exchanged glances. "Can you remember when that was?" "It would have been late summer, maybe August or September, after Kellyanne had already disappeared." Emma felt her heart racing. If Mrs. Dunham had seen a child in Brennan's van after Kellyanne's disappearance, it could mean that Kellyanne had still been alive at that point, that she might have survived her initial captivity. After they finished the interview, the group drove to the playground where Kellyanne Foster had last been seen. It was a small neighborhood park with a swing set, a slide and a sandbox surrounded by oak trees. Emma tried to imagine what had happened there 23 years ago. "He would have watched her for weeks," Emma said, standing where Brennan's van had been parked. "He would have learned her routine, figured out when she was most vulnerable. The grandmother who was with her said Kellyanne was playing on the swings," Agent Chen said. "She looked away for maybe 2 minutes to talk to another parent, and when she looked back, Kellyanne was gone." Emma walked over to the swing set, trying to see the playground through Brennan's eyes. He would have had to move very quickly, and he would have needed to be sure no one would see him take her. "There are houses on 3 sides," Dr. Reeves observed. "He would have had to approach from the wooded area," Emma nodded, "and he would have had his van positioned for a quick escape." She looked around the neighborhood, noting the sightlines and potential witnesses. But if Mrs. Dunham saw a child in his van weeks later, that means he didn't kill Kellyanne immediately. He kept her alive. "The question is for how long," Agent Chen said quietly. That evening, back at the safe house in Vermont, Emma sat with Sarah and Dr. Reeves processing what they'd learned in Rhode Island. "I keep thinking about that little girl Mrs. Dunham saw in the van," Emma said. "If it was Kellyanne, she was still alive weeks after her disappearance. She might have been. Alive for months or even years." "Emma," Dr. Reeves said gently, "you can't let yourself get too caught up in speculation. We don't know for certain what Mrs. Dunham saw. But if Kellyanne did survive for a while, if she's still out there somewhere, then the FBI will find her," Sarah said firmly. "But your job is to focus on your own healing, not to solve every missing child case personally." Emma knew her mother was right, but she also knew she couldn't stop thinking about the other victims. She'd been given a second chance at life, and she felt obligated to use it to help others who might still be trapped in the nightmare she'd escaped. That night, she lay awake thinking about Kellyanne Foster, wondering if somewhere in the darkness, another young woman was waiting for rescue, just as Emma had waited for 18 years. The break in the case came from an unexpected source. 3 days after the Rhode Island interview, a retired postal worker named Frank Kowalski called the FBI tip line with information about Richard Brennan that would change everything. "I delivered mail in Putnam, Connecticut from 1995 to 2010, Kowalski told Agent Chen over the phone. "I remember that guy because he was always weird about his mail delivery. Real paranoid. Wanted everything held at the post office instead of delivered to his house." Agent Chen immediately drove to Connecticut to interview Kowalski in person, bringing Emma along at her own request. Emma had convinced Dr. Reeves that participating in the investigation was helping her process her own trauma, though the psychologist remained concerned about Emma's emotional state. "Tell me about Brennan's mail patterns," Chen said as they sat in Kowalski's living room. "He came in every few days to pick up his mail, always paid for everything in cash, rent on the P.O. box, postage, everything. But the weird thing was what he was receiving." "What do you mean?" Kowalski pulled out a notebook where he'd been jotting down his memories. "Medical supplies. Not prescription drugs, but things like bandages, antibiotics, pain medication that you can buy online. And children's. Clothing ordered from catalogs." Emma felt her stomach clench. "Children's clothing?" "Yeah, and not just one size. He was getting clothes for different ages. Little kid stuff, teenage sizes, everything in between. I remember thinking it was strange for a guy who lived alone." Agent Chen leaned forward. "Did you ever see any children with him?" "Never. But I'll tell you what else was odd. He was getting educational materials. Textbooks, workbooks, the kind of stuff teachers use for homeschooling." Emma and Chen exchanged glances. This confirmed what they'd suspected, that Brennan had been holding multiple children over the years, educating them as they grew up in captivity. "Mr. Kowalski," Emma said quietly, "did he ever receive mail for anyone else? Different names?" "On the packages," Kowalski nodded. "That's the other thing that stuck with me. He had mail coming for different people. Sarah Johnson, Michelle Davis, Amy Wilson. I figured maybe he was running some kind of business out of his house, but it never made sense." Agent Chen made rapid notes. "Do you remember any other names?" "Let me think. There was definitely a Rebecca Martinez, I think. And maybe a Kelly something." Emma gripped the arms of her chair. Those were the names of the missing girls they'd been investigating. After the interview, Chen and Emma drove to the property in Putnam, where Brennan had lived during the late 1990s and early 2000s. The house had been torn down and replaced with a modern development, but Emma could visualize what had been there based on the property records. "This is where he held Rebecca," Emma said, standing in what would have been the backyard. "And maybe others." "We're going to bring in ground-penetrating radar," Chen said grimly. "If there are burial sites here, we'll find them." But Emma was thinking about something else. Agent Chen, those names that the postal worker mentioned, Sarah Johnson, Michelle Davis, Amy Wilson, what if those weren't aliases for Brennan's business activities? "What do you mean?" "What if those were the names he gave to the girls he was holding? New identities to replace their real ones?" Chen stared at Emma. "You think he was systematically erasing their identities the way he tried to do with you?" "Yes. And if that's true, then some of those girls might still be alive, living under fake names, not knowing who they really are." The implications were staggering. If Brennan had been creating false identities for his victims, there could be young women across New England who had no idea they were missing persons, just as Emma had lived for years as Chloe Richardson. That evening, back in Vermont, Emma met with a larger FBI task force that had been assembled to investigate the expanded scope of Brennan's crimes. The conference room was filled with agents, detectives, and missing persons specialists from 6 different states. Based on the evidence we've gathered, Agent Chen addressed the room, we believe Richard Brennan was operating a sophisticated child trafficking operation for over 20 years. He wasn't just kidnapping children, he was creating new identities for them and potentially selling them to other perpetrators. Emma felt sick. You think he sold some of the children? It's possible. The medical supplies, the false identities, the careful documentation, it all suggests a level of organization that goes beyond one person acting alone. Detective Ray Morrison, who had driven down from Vermont, raised his hand. What's our next step? We're going to cross-reference missing children reports with the names Kowalski remembered, Chen replied. And we're going to start looking for young women living under those identities who might be trafficking victims. Emma stood up. I want to help with the interviews. If there are other girls like me out there, they might relate better to someone who's been through the same experience. Dr. Reeves looked concerned. Emma, that could be extremely traumatic for you. Everything about this is traumatic, Emma replied. But if I can help bring other girls home to their families, I have to try. Agent Chen nodded slowly. We'll consider it. But Emma, you need to understand. If we find other victims, some of them might not want to be found. They might have built lives under their false identities, or they might be too frightened to admit who they really are. I know, Emma said, but they deserve the chance to make that choice for themselves. As the meeting concluded, Emma realized that her role in the investigation was evolving. She was no longer just a victim or even just a survivor. She was becoming an advocate for other victims, a bridge between the world of law enforcement and the hidden world of trafficking survivors. It was a role she'd never asked for, but one she was determined to fulfill. Too many families had spent too many years wondering what happened to their children. If Emma could help provide answers, she would do whatever it took, even if it meant confronting the darkest aspects of her own captivity and facing the possibility that her 18 years in Brennan's basement had been just one small part of a much larger and more horrible crime. The search for victims living under false identities began with Michelle Davis, one of the names the postal worker had remembered. FBI databases showed a Michelle Davis born in 1995 who had applied for a driver's license in Vermont in 2013, but there was no birth certificate or school records prior to that date. Agent Chen and Emma drove to the address listed on Michelle's license application, a small apartment building in St. Albans, Vermont, about an hour north of Millbrook. Emma's hands shook as they climbed the stairs to apartment 3B. Remember, Chen said quietly, if this is who we think it is, she's been living a lie for even longer than you were. She might not be ready to hear the truth. Emma nodded, though. Her heart was racing. The possibility that there was another survivor, someone who had endured the same captivity she had, made her both hopeful and terrified. A young woman answered the door after several knocks. She was small and thin, with brown hair and cautious eyes that immediately reminded Emma of her own guarded expression during her modeling days. Emma guessed she was in her early 20s, though trauma often made people look older than their years. Michelle Davis? Agent Chen showed her badge. I'm Special Agent Chen with the FBI. This is Emma Hayes. We'd like to ask you a few questions. The woman's face went pale. What's this about? May we come in? It's about your past, and some things that might have happened to you when you were younger. Michelle hesitated, then stepped aside to let them enter. The apartment was sparse but clean, with the kind of minimal personal touches that suggested someone who was ready to leave at a moment's notice. Michelle, Emma said gently, what do you remember about your childhood? I don't understand why you're asking me that. Agent Chen pulled out a photograph of Richard Brennan. Do you recognize this man? Michelle stared at the photo for a long moment, and Emma saw something flicker across her face. Recognition, fear, maybe even relief. His name is Richard Brennan, Chen continued. He's currently in custody for kidnapping and child trafficking. Charges. Michelle sank into a chair, her hands trembling. I need you to leave. Michelle, Emma said, sitting down across from her. My name is Emma Hayes, but for 18 years I believed my name was Chloe Richardson. I was taken from a daycare center when I was 3 years old, and Richard Brennan held me captive until last month. Michelle's eyes widened. That's not possible. It is possible. And I think the same thing happened to you. Emma leaned forward carefully. Michelle, what's your earliest clear memory? Michelle stopped, looking confused. I was maybe 8 or 9. Richard found me after my parents died. He took care of me. Did he show you newspaper clippings about your parents' death? Michelle nodded slowly. Those were fake, Agent Chen said gently. Michelle, we believe your real name is Amanda Chen, no relation to me. You disappeared from a shopping mall in Albany, New York in 2003. You were 7 years old. Michelle began shaking her head frantically. No, that's not right. My parents died in a car accident. Richard saved me. Emma reached out and gently touched Michelle's hand. I know how confusing this is. I know how hard it is to accept that everything you believed about your life was a lie. But Michelle, you have a family who's been looking for you for 20 years. I don't have a family, Michelle whispered. Richard is all I have. That's what he wanted you to believe, Emma said, but it wasn't true for me. And it's not true for you. Agent Chen showed Michelle a missing person flyer with a photo of 7-year-old Amanda Chen. The resemblance was unmistakable, despite the years and the trauma. Michelle stared at the flyer, tears streaming down her face. I remember this dress, she said quietly. I remember a woman buying it for me. She said it matched my eyes. That was your mother, Chen said. Her name is Linda Chen. She lives in Albany and she's never stopped looking for you. Michelle broke down completely then, years of suppressed memories and emotions pouring out. Emma moved to sit beside her, offering the kind of comfort she wished she'd had during her own moment of recognition. How did you get away from him? Michelle asked through her tears. I didn't, Emma admitted. The FBI found me. But you got away on your own, didn't you? Michelle nodded. When I turned 18, he said I was old enough to live independently. He helped me get identification and find this apartment, but he said if I ever told anyone about him, something terrible would happen to me. He was still controlling you, even after you left. I've been so scared, Michelle whispered. For the past few years, I felt like something was wrong with my life, like I was missing something important, but I didn't know what. Agent Chen leaned forward. Michelle, Amanda, would you like to call your parents? They're still in Albany, still hoping you'll come home. Michelle looked terrified. What if they don't want me? What if I'm too different now? Emma squeezed her hand. I had the same fear about my mother. But love doesn't disappear just because time passes. Your parents have been waiting for you. 20 minutes later, Michelle sat with Emma's support while Agent Chen dialed Linda Chen's number in Albany. The conversation was brief, just Michelle saying, Mom, it's Amanda, I'm coming home. The sound of Linda Chen's sobs of joy could be heard across the room. As they prepared to leave St. Albans, with Michelle, Amanda packed and ready to reunite with her family, Emma realized that this was what she'd been meant to do. Not just survive her own captivity, but help other survivors find their way back to the lives they'd been stolen from. Agent Chen, Emma said as they drove south toward Albany, how many more do you think there are? Based on the names from the postal worker and the evidence we found at Brennan's properties, possibly 6 or 7 more young women living under false identities. Emma looked back at Michelle, who was sleeping in the back seat, emotionally exhausted from the day's revelations. We're going to find them all, aren't we? We're going to try, Chen replied, and with your help, I think we have a real chance, Emma nodded, feeling a sense of purpose she'd never experienced before. Her 18 years of captivity had been horrible, but if they led to the rescue of other victims, then maybe some good could come from the worst experience of her life. There were more survivors out there, living lives built on lies, waiting for someone to tell them the truth about who they really were, and Emma was going to help bring them home. 6 months after Emma's rescue, the final pieces of Richard Brennan's criminal enterprise were falling into place. The FBI task force had located and identified 7 survivors living under false identities across New England, ranging in age from 19 to 28. Each reunion had been different, some joyful, some complicated, all deeply emotional. Emma had been present for every identification and reunion, serving as both a bridge between the survivors and law enforcement, and a living example that recovery was possible. She'd also become the unofficial spokesperson for the group, using her public platform to advocate for missing children and trafficking victims. Today, she sat in a federal courthouse in Boston, preparing to give her victim impact statement at Richard Brennan's sentencing hearing. He had pled guilty to 17 federal charges, including kidnapping, child trafficking, and creating false identification documents in exchange for a sentence of life in prison without possibility of parole. Sarah Hayes sat in the front row, behind the prosecutor's table, offering silent support to her daughter. Also present were several other survivor families: Linda Chen with her daughter Amanda, the Martinez family with Rebecca, who had been found living as Sarah Johnson in Maine, and the Foster family with Kelly Ann, who had survived as Amy Wilson in New Hampshire. Emma had spent weeks preparing her statement, working with Dr. Reeves to find words that would convey the impact of Brennan's crimes, while also highlighting the strength and resilience of his survivors. "Your Honor," Emma began, standing at the key podium, "my name is Emma Hayes. 23 years ago, when I was 3 years old, Richard Brennan stole me from a daycare center and held me captive for 18 years. But today, I want to talk not just about what he took from me, but about what he failed to destroy." She looked directly at Brennan, who sat at the defendant's table with his head down. "Mr. Brennan, you tried to erase my identity, my family, my past. You created a prison and called it protection. You built your life around controlling and manipulating children, convincing us that we needed you to survive." Emma's voice grew, stronger. "But you failed. You failed because love is stronger than fear, truth is stronger than lies, and hope is stronger than despair. My mother never stopped looking for me. The FBI never closed my case, and when I was finally found, I chose to use my freedom to help find the other children you stole." She gestured toward the other survivors in the courtroom. 7 young women have been reunited with their families because your crimes were exposed. 7 families have their children back. That's 7 victories against your campaign of terror." Emma paused, gathering her thoughts. "I won't pretend that what you did to us doesn't matter. We lost years of our lives, milestones we can never reclaim, relationships that were damaged by your interference. Some of us struggle with trust, with intimacy, with believing we deserve love and happiness. But we are not broken. We are not victims waiting to be saved. We are survivors who have chosen to rebuild our lives on our own terms. We are daughters who have found our way home. We are advocates who will ensure that other missing children are not forgotten." Emma looked up at the judge. "Your Honor, Richard Brennan's sentence should reflect not just the seriousness of his crimes, but the strength of those who survived them. We ask for justice not out of vengeance, but out of hope that other perpetrators will see that crimes against children will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law." She turned back to Brennan one final time. "Mr. Brennan, you spent decades trying to control our lives, but you never controlled our spirits, our capacity for love, or our determination to find our way back to the people who truly care about. Gus, your power over us is finished." Emma returned to her seat as the judge prepared to announce Brennan's sentence. Around her, the families of survivors held hands, supporting each other through this final chapter of a nightmare that had lasted more than 2 decades. "Richard Michael Brennan," the judge said, "you have committed crimes of extraordinary cruelty against the most vulnerable members of our society. You stole childhoods, destroyed families, and caused immeasurable pain to countless individuals. However, as Ms. Hayes has eloquently demonstrated, you did not succeed in destroying the human spirit. The young women you victimized have shown remarkable courage in reclaiming their lives and helping others do the same. I hereby sentence you to life in prison without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 200 years for your crimes against children. You will never again have the opportunity to harm a child. As Brennan was led away in shackles, Emma felt a chapter of her life closing. The man who had stolen her childhood was gone forever, but more importantly, the fear he had instilled in her was finally beginning to fade. Outside the courthouse, Emma was surrounded by reporters, but she had learned to handle media attention with grace and purpose. "Ms. Hayes," one journalist called out, "what's next for you?" Emma smiled, thinking about the plans she'd been making with Sarah and Dr. Reeves. "I'm starting college in the fall, something I never thought would be possible. I'm also working with several organizations that support missing children and trafficking survivors. My experience taught me that recovery is possible, and I want to help other survivors understand that they can rebuild their lives too." Any message for other families dealing with missing children? Never give up hope, Emma said firmly. "My mother searched for me for 18 years, and that hope brought me home. Every missing child deserves that kind of love and persistence." As the crowd of reporters dispersed, Emma walked with Sarah toward their car. The late afternoon sun was warm on her face, and for the first time in months, Emma felt truly free. "I'm proud of you," Sarah said, linking arms with her daughter. "You've become an extraordinary young woman." "I had an extraordinary example," Emma replied, "a mother who never stopped believing I was worth finding." They drove north toward Vermont, toward the small town where Emma's story had begun and where she was now building a new chapter. She had lost 18 years of her life, but she had gained something else, a purpose, a voice, and the knowledge that even the darkest experiences could be transformed into sources of light for others. Behind them, the city of Boston faded into the distance, along with the courthouse where justice had finally been served. Ahead lay the future, uncertain but full of possibility, frightening but also hopeful. Emma Hayes was finally, truly free.